there, podcast listeners. Welcome back to the new episode of AI Chronicles. So, we hear a lot about RAG, different use cases of RAG, and folks still figuring out how to productionize the RAG applications, finding the right infrastructure for it, and so much more. So, just to discuss just that and a little bit more, I invited Xander Matheson, founder of ByteWax. Hi, Xander. Before
Hey,
we start, before we start talking about RAG and the cool stuff, why don't you tell us what motivated you to start your own company, ByteWax?
sure thing. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today. Uh, there's a really quite a long story to why I started Bivax, but I think the short story is I was working on machine learning infrastructure around when kind of MLOps was becoming a thing. I saw an opportunity to take what I had learned previously at GitHub and try and uh, build those tools and sell them on the market and iterated it a couple times, but landed on ByteWax, which is a stateful stream processor, Python based. And it was all in order to try to enable more real-time machine learning and real-time feature transformation specifically. But now it's a generally applicable stream processor. So that's why I always wanted to, build something. I kind of see myself as a builder, and so this is sort of like the ultimate building that I could do. And so, yeah, took the leap, naively took the leap, and then went for it.
Nice. Okay, I'm curious, why the name ByteWax?
Yeah, there's also, I guess, a longer story there, but what I like to use is so I was a ski racer in another life, a previous life, and in skiing you wax the skis, and when you
Right,
wax the
right.
skis with the right type of wax, it makes them slide along the snow, and so
Okay.
you can sort of build this visual in your head of the bites sliding
Oh
along.
my wow. Oh wow.
And then we
Okay.
sort of took that and ran with this whole idea of like bees and beeswax and honey and all that. And so like it really spiraled out of control. But that's kind of where it came from. Where there was a couple people I was like kind of brainstorming with at the time, and in addition to that, it's a kind of novel uh, word, or I guess conglomeration of words,
Yeah.
and so it's easy to get domains for it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was just curious because when I first came across your company, I'm like, bite wax. The bite, the word bite makes sense to me, but the wax, I couldn't connect the dots. But yeah, I'm always curious about what founders think behind naming the company, so that's why I was curious.
Yeah.
So how big is your team?
We're 10 people now,
Mm,
so still small. We're distributed all over the place.
nice.
Well, three continents at least. We're,
Okay.
folks in North America and one person down in South America, and then a few over in Europe.
Nice.
Yeah,
Cool. Okay. All right. So, I had fun getting to know about your company and you. Let's get
yeah,
started with the RAG question. So,
sure.
there's been a crazy amount of discussion over RAG. Like everywhere I go, attend events, I know that at least one talk will be about RAG. At least
Yeah,
one talk.
yeah.
So, according to you, do you think companies have successfully productionized these RAG applications?
Well, before we go into that, do you think we
Hmm.
should at least kind of like decompose what RAG is for folks, or
Yeah,
does
might
everyone, do
as
you
well.
think
Yes.
everyone on the podcast knows?
No, I don't. You know
Okay.
what? RAG is still very early on
Yeah.
concept, so
I
might as
always
well start.
assume I'm
Yeah.
like, if I know it, everyone's gonna know it, but I think that is a wrong assumption I always make. So, RAG, well, I can do it if you
Yeah,
want.
go for it.
Retrieval
Go.
augmented generation. The first time I ever gave a talk on RAG, because I've been one of those people that did a talk on RAG. I describe it as like shoving things in the prompt. You're like, go out and find the truth, and then you shove that truth into the prompt that you ultimately ship off to the model, so the
Mm,
model can generate correct answer. So that's kind of what RAG embodies. And then like the very simple version of RAG is like, hey, you're in ChatGPT. I uploaded a document and now I want to ask questions about it or whatever. And then the other end of the spectrum is like, well, we have a repository, a huge repository of proprietary data that doesn't exist within the LLM, and now we want to be able to like provide that, and that's constantly changing and updating, et cetera. And so that's when you get this really sophisticated thing that can be boiled down to like retrieval. So it's like search ingestion or semantic understanding, retrieval, and then the prompt and generative response.
Fair. Yeah, I think that's actually a very good way to describe RAG in simple terms. The other definition, or rather the other analogy that I saw online on one of the blogs, I think it was VV8's blog, one of their blogs, where it said that they compared the analogy with like an open book exam. And that I'm like, okay, yeah, that's, I can resonate. I've given many of those open book exams. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's like you have all these books and articles for you to leverage, which is basically what you give for the RAG as a RAG component. So, okay,
yeah,
cool.
I
Yes.
like that one. I like that one too.
Yeah.
I'm just like envisioning like someone, flipping the pages as fast
Yes.
as
Yes.
possible to find, oh God, was it in chapter 5? No, it was chapter
Yep.
8. Oh, what's
Oh
the
gosh,
answer?
yeah.
I
College
hated
days,
open book.
engineering. Me too.
I
Me too.
hated open book exams because it just meant you had such a breadth of material that
Yes,
they could ask
exactly. And I wasn't
questions
sure, like,
about.
okay, am I spending much time on finding the answer, or do I know the answer and
Yeah,
just write it?
yeah,
But
totally.
well, at least it served as a good analogy for RAG.
Yeah, yeah, okay, so coming back to your question, I think it was
Mhm.
applications. Have I seen successful applications,
So in
AI
production.
or RAG
Yeah.
applications in production?
Yeah.
Um, I think, well, so I don't know if I've had like out in the wild seen very
Hmm.
well done um, RAG examples, and I think it's really hard to tell when you're looking at just the user interface if it's RAG or if they have a fine-tuned model or if it's something trained themselves or they're doing something
Hmm.
funky. Um, so I don't know if I have a specific example I can point to in the wild that I've used where I think they've like really gone all the way. I know that, uh, I mean, GitHub does kind of, so previous life, I was working at GitHub, um, and I spoke to one of the product folks not that long ago, I guess, I don't know, a few months ago, and he was explaining how they do, um, how they make Copilot work. And it's sort of
Right.
like this hybrid search plus embedding approach that they're trying to work towards. I think right now it's more search fact, but so that's a RAG application where they're kind of like constantly querying the code base to try and provide the model with more examples or truths or like that open book. So I guess that is one really interesting example.
Hmm.
That I've seen in out in the wild. What about yourself?
Um, just like you, like the co-pilot thing is what I had in mind too. The others are like I'm just like listening and reading a lot about the RAG chatbots, RAG personal assistants, and then now there's GraphRag, which I'm still yet to explore. I'm actually going to build like a knowledge graph based on my current project, but just that different there are many prototypes of RAG, I think,
Yeah.
but I guess with the lack of resources or maybe just time consumption and just that people are still figuring out how to put it in production. I think there's a lot more research to go on over it.
Mm.
That's what my thought is, and well, that's what I've heard at least in all of these events that I hear about
Yeah.
hear the talks about RAG.
Yeah.
Um,
We did a workshop. So this isn't like a in the wild thing. We did a RAG workshop a couple months ago with
mhm,
Unstructured and Microsoft, and the idea behind it was like a personal finance reporting. And so
mhm,
basically, you'd have all of you'd have a pipeline that was sort of ingesting all of the news and SEC filings that are happening, throughout the day, and then you'd have some other like stock ticker data or whatever. And basically the application is that you would provide a set of stocks,
mhm,
and then this thing could, based on like some rules, would like generate you a report with all that data that's then stored, and like they would retrieve that and use the LLM to provide you the most up-to-date um, information in that report, which is, I
right.
don't know, it's kind of fun to think about. Like it's not, I haven't seen it done that way,
Mhm.
but there's probably all sorts of like, if you're a financial institution, you can't like just probably there's some liability around like actually
Yeah, I
building something
bet.
like that.
Yeah, and especially with the financial documents or just like the data, you have to be very careful too. So yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we talked about like, how these people are using RAG and trying to accommodate in their existing pipelines. So what do you think are the biggest challenges for enterprises to incorporate RAG?
I think one really big challenge is outside of just the technical hurdles is that you're now introducing like additional variables to like the
Mm.
final output that you have to be able to like disambiguate out of the like black box and understand. So you're like, what, on one side you might have how do you ingest that information and structure it. On the other side, you're like, how do you retrieve it and then re-rank it potentially. And so now you have like additional complexity that you have to evaluate,
Mm.
and you probably want to be able to evaluate them in a separated fashion. So like, I want to have my re-ranking evaluation, or I want to have my retrieval evaluation, or like, is the way that I'm chunking the data incorrect? And that's what I want to actually evaluate. And you have to add that evaluation as well as whatever's coming out of the LLM.
Right,
So I think
right.
that's difficult. Then there's the technical piece of like, let's upskill the whole team
Mm.
or hire someone. And now that has like they can build data pipelines, they can work with a bunch of different data structures and data sources, and they know how to use the like state of the art search, or even search technologies, or even like older search technologies, build evaluations around that, manage all of that infrastructure. And so
Mm.
there's that technical expertise, and then there's just like the infrastructure to support that is actually quite
Yeah,
large, right?
yeah, yeah. And do you think like, so let me backtrack. So, uh, what kind of evaluation do you think people are using to evaluate RAG or the output from the RAG-based applications rather?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I don't know for sure. I don't
Hmm.
think I have a good pulse on that.
Okay.
Uh I suspect you want to use similar metrics you use to evaluate
Mm,
search or recommendations.
right.
Um, but I don't know if you can exactly use some of those. You don't have the idea of like what the click through is, or like,
Mm,
so um I don't know.
yeah, I feel like that probably is another like a challenge when it comes to like RAG-based applications. Like, how are you evaluating? Because I know people have been using RAG and fine tuning in combination, but fine tuning becomes very resource extensive. So people are leaning towards more RAG, but then there's challenges around how good or how accurate the results are. So it's a whole vicious cycle, I feel.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so speaking of more challenges, now going to your real-time data.
Mm,
What are the challenges in managing or even getting the real-time data?
yeah. So this is where I focus more
Hmm.
of my time on, is the real-time data and stream processing. Uh, Oh, it's another rabbit hole. So challenges for real-time data. I mean, first you have like a different processing paradigm. So some of the things that you assume, if you've been coming from like a batch world, don't necessarily hold true in the like stream processing world, because you don't know when the data ends. And sometimes data comes out of order. So there's some things there you have to like wrap your head around, which aren't like the end of the world, but it's difficult. Then there's like connecting to different data sources. So if you're coming from a batch world, there's a whole set of new tools and systems that you'll be interacting with for real-time data, whether that's on the source side or the sync side. You've probably heard of Kafka before, or
Hmm.
Pulsar. And there's WebSockets, and there's Kinesis. And so there's these different systems that have different ways of functioning that are different than maybe your regular database, or simply pulling an endpoint once once a day, or every 12 hours or something like that. So that's one difficulty, is kind of just switching that paradigm. The other is kind of around, I guess, around scale and managing how you scale those data pipelines. At the end of the day, most of your your data processing will still be happening in like a pipeline fashion. That's what a Bytewax workload is, still a pipeline. It has a source and a sink or an output, input and an output, and it has some steps that are basically a graph to processing. So it sounds like, anything else you might have seen at Airflow,
Hmm.
DAG, or whatever. So the pipelines are still similar, but what's happening in each of those steps is kind of different because it's continuously happening. So
Hmm.
you're not like complete step one, then do step two. It's like everything is kind of chained to each other and the data is passing through and it's sort of flowing through one by one. When things get tricky now is like when that is when there's high throughput. So if you have many partitions coming in and you have to scale the number of workers you have and you end up with this distributed system problem where you need like the right data to go to the right worker so that your computation is correctly, that's when things really get out of hand. And that's where stream processors were created to facilitate that. Is like, okay, I have my input is split into 6 parts so I can facilitate more throughput. Now I need 6 workers to like listen to those 6 parts. But the data might be in slightly different orders because of which partitions it is on, or maybe I need to move data from one worker to another so that when I group and reduce the data, say I'm like, or just collect it, say I'm collecting it to a window, like I want
Hmm.
all the events that group user A did for a certain amount of time, I need to make sure all those events from user A, regardless of what partition they're in the input, come into the right worker so that I can collect them and then do whatever I need with them. So
Got
I
it.
think that's where things get really tricky because
Hmm.
you have all of this going on and then maybe you have single digit latency um,
Mm.
requirements as well.
Right. So do you think the enterprises have the right infrastructure to store and manage real-time data?
Most enterprises have Kafka, which
Mhm.
is
Okay.
the most commonly used like substrate for
Okay.
storage and transport. Uh, I think it's like the penetration across the Fortune 500 is like 80+%. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
Kafka out there.
Okay.
Um, and so I think they have that, but the expertise is not shared across the organization. And so there will be a very small subset of that organization that actually knows how to leverage the data in Kafka. And so generally what you see is a team that creates like a platform to either move that data into uh, a data lake or data warehouse or something that's you easily actionable by the rest of the different teams, or
Hmm.
they'll build some platform that enables teams to like query that stuff and use that data directly. Um, and that's like the common pattern we've seen, and that requires a lot of skill and it's quite
Yeah.
expensive and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that they're well equipped to store the data or like use Kafka. They're
Hmm.
less well equipped to use the data that's in there
Oh,
um,
wow.
in a reasonable manner. Like it's just the bar is so high to use the existing set of tools. That's why we made Bytewax
Hmm.
to actually use that data in a cost efficient or effective or efficient manner. Um, like if you want to go use Kafka and you want to do some advanced processing, it's like go learn Flink and become a
Mm.
Flink expert, and now you can like write your one workload. So it's just like it's untenable. In if you compare that, the alternative is like dump that data somewhere else, and then I'll just write a SQL query. Like
Oh,
it's
okay.
like
And yeah, especially all these things with real-time data, that must be quite a challenge. And do you think like people have like in the, for example, not startups, but like large enterprises where people are dealing with the real-time data and using Kafka to store it, and you say that it's a little challenging when it comes to using that data that's stored. Do you think there's lack of skills that is making it difficult, or what is it? Just curious. I know cost is one point, but talking from like if you have all the budget, but then skills are missing, is that what it is?
I mean, you have supply and demand. So,
Mm.
you know, the demand has to be there. So you need to have a problem that will increase the capabilities of the business or increase the bottom line of the business. Like, you have to affect the business some way.
Right.
So there has to
Hmm.
be a problem that you need to solve. And then the supply side is what you're talking about, which is the skill. And I think it's honestly, probably a little bit of both. Like we see more and more problems being solved in a streaming fashion,
Right.
but that's still growing. And then as a result, we see more and more people becoming upskilled. But the skill level was really high. Like the number of Flink experts in the world. I keep saying Flink because it's kind of the number one. If you're not familiar with Apache
I'm not.
Flink,
Okay. Good
it's the
to know.
number one tool used for stream processing, but you could also use uh, Apache Beam or
Okay.
Spark structured streaming. But anyway, the
Okay.
number of people that are highly skilled in that are really is really low because it's been one quite a niche problem. The biggest enterprises with the most expensive problems send the most expensive people after them. It's that sort of thing, like a self-fulfilling prophecy there. So
Mm.
I think as we shine light on more and more problems that can be easily solved in real time with a lower uh, time to value, because the new tools like Bytex are way easier to use, we'll probably see that whole thing kind of grow. Maybe it's like a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem,
Mhm.
probably.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And why do you think real-time data is the future of AI innovation? I think I might have read, or probably you gave a talk at Eugene's event few weeks back. Maybe that's where
Hmm.
you spoke a little bit about this. I'm curious. Why do you think so?
Yeah, well, there's like two parts, I think, normally what I explain. So the first, like pie in the sky sort of thing, we continue to like create ways to automate things in the digital world,
Hmm.
well, and in the physical world with robotics, but focusing on the digital world. So we continue to have like operational automation, and a lot of that is backed by machine learning and will continue to be backed by AI. So we're going to imagine like all of these autonomous systems now
Hmm.
functioning, and part of our future job is to like understand, observe, and react to these automated systems. Is something going offline? Is something happening? Or is the AI taking over the world? Whatever that might be, and a lot of that is going to require uh, real-time infrastructure.
Hmm.
They're going to be generating so much structured and unstructured data. Like we
Yeah.
already generate so much structured and unstructured data. We don't necessarily need to understand all of it. But if there are autonomous systems operating things that are affecting us, we're going to have more and more desire to understand and observe and react to all of that. So that's one thing. And then it's also just like a really efficient way to process, especially for a lot of these like operational automations. It's like streaming and stream processing and stateful stream processing is a pretty efficient way to manage these things. You have these stream of inputs for the system, and you need like something to happen right away, and you need
Mm.
context and understanding of what's happened in the past. That's like a streaming problem.
Right. Right.
So why not apply some of the tools that we've already been building for like the past 10, 14 years um, to these problems?
Mm. Fair. Um, just like talking about these, I forgot to ask you one RAG-related question. Do you have any favorite use case of RAG that you can talk about?
Um, well, I did mention the Copilot one,
Hmm.
and obviously our workshop one. Um, I think they're using. I mean, I don't think I have a. I like the idea of the finance one. I also
Hmm.
like the idea of using RAG for like personal
Yeah.
implementations. Like that are on device or whatever. I think that that's a really big unlock. Could be a really big unlock in the future. Like let's we can have a lighter weight model on the device, but with a lot of like truth about the person. And that would be amazing. Like it has my schedule and has my past emails, and it's on the device and nothing's leaving the device, and it can help me scaffold an email, or it can help me, it can schedule some meetings for me or whatever. And like this idea of this, like obviously it's exciting for every like I don't know, technologist or futurist, this
Yeah.
idea of like this like bot
Yeah,
kind of.
having to exactly, yeah. That does sound exciting, especially if it can do the menial jobs, like as you said, like schedule a meeting or fill a form or something like that. Cool. Okay. Yeah, those are some cool, could be good use cases for RAG. You mentioned a number of tools. So, are there any go-to tools for any AI pipeline that maybe you use for any applications you may have built?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, my job is like to come up with use cases or look at pre others' work and then build like use cases or sort of case studies around those. That's like part of my job. So I'm not building too many like production systems.
Hmm.
But some of the tools I've used, one that I came across uh, over a year ago now, Unstructured.
Oh,
Uh,
unstructured IO.
yeah, was
Mm-hmm.
something I used for just handling unstructured data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the first time I ever built something that was RAG, I like didn't know there was no term RAG yet, I don't think. So I just called
Yeah,
it like
yeah.
real-time embeddings for finance, and I used unstructured to like process financial news,
Mm-hmm.
and then shove it in a vector database. So unstructured one, Haystack is so Laura, who's the developer advocate at Bytewax, recently joined us a few months ago now. She's a big fan of Haystack, and we used Haystack in the last workshop. It seems like really nice technology. Their rewrite seems nice. It seems less of like wrapper code and more like useful functional code. Some of the I don't know, maybe I'll get like banned or something, but some of the tools that have come out in the AI space I find are like so wrapper heavy, and you're like, you're just a super opinionated wrapper and you're not providing me any building blocks. You're just like, I just want you to go away. So I stay away from those a lot. Then there's the vector databases, or vector indices on databases. There, I like any database that's a single binary and that I can also have like an in-memory or in-process version for testing and development. That's what
Mm-hmm.
attracted me to using like well over a year ago using Quadrant.
Mm.
Um, and I know many of them have this capability now, but and I love SQLite. I like, it's just so easy to build with tools like that. But Quadrant has like an in-memory, like, you know, so you can just develop. You don't need to like,
Right.
okay, if you want to use this thing, like go use this cloud database or like, set up this Kubernetes cluster just so you can like run this thing once. And you're like, it's just so annoying. So um yeah, that for that reason I found Quadrant. I think since then there's a lot of other tools that give you that same capability. Uh let's see, I'm just like trying to think through. I don't spend that much time on the evaluation stuff because,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I'm not building production systems, but I'm
Yeah.
sure there are some good tools there that people are building. Um, I'll give a shout out to a friend of mine, Hamel Hussein. He ran a course recently, and I know they had some good tools and some good information. Um, about RAG and
Mm.
generative AI and stuff. And I think they made a lot of it free. I can't remember the name of the course, but if you go check him out on Twitter or anywhere,
Yeah.
Hamel Hussein, you'd find it.
Okay.
Um, yeah. What about you? Are there anything that's been catching your eye recently?
Um, well, in terms of vector databases, I haven't used Quadrant yet, but I have used Milvus, VV8, Aperture Data. With Aperture Data, I like the idea of having the capability of building a knowledge graph, which is what I'm using for my most recent project. It's podcast semantic search, and I
Yeah,
have a lot of metadata associated with the podcast that I do. So just trying to build a knowledge graph based on that would be really cool. And Aperture Data basically provides that functionality already with the vector database capabilities as well. But other than that, like I've used, I'm more into building LLM oriented applications and definitely not productionizing. So again, just like you, not into the evaluation, not super familiar, but with for LLMs, there's of course OpenAI, but then Cohere's command-R models are doing really good. And
yeah.
their embedding model are really strong. So I have used that in most of my projects. What else? For evaluation and monitoring, I have actually used Phoenix from Atos AI. I'm not
Oh,
sure if you
cool.
have heard. Yeah, so their tool is yeah, they have come up with more and more advancements, and yeah, it's pretty easy to use. Like I have
Yeah,
used, just uploaded my script and just ask it to tell me where the error was, and then the whole back tracing and the monitoring the performance. That was pretty cool with what
Yeah.
their tool provides. But yeah, I have not worked with real-time data, so cannot really speak with the whole batch processing and streaming the actual data. So that's
Yeah.
something for my next project, I would say. Uh,
Yeah, with
yeah.
Bytewax. No.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course. I'm actually, after we are done with the recording, I'm gonna ask you a few questions.
Okay, sure.
But before we end our conversation, I have one last question for you.
Sure.
What are some of your recommendations for the data enthusiasts who want to build their profile in this space?
Hmm. To build their profile so that for a job or for it to become a like
Just
influencer or
uh,
thought leader.
could be anything.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think my advice is always the same, like get as much experience as you can. So like tinker. I
Hmm.
mean, I think that which is um I was thinking about this recently was like, okay, what is assuming there's like some sort of trajectory that remains the same with AI and then how it becomes like infused in our lives. Like what is one thing for sure that is like a guaranteed skill that you can have now that is going to still help you tomorrow. And funnily enough, I like came back to this idea of communication. So, but instead of maybe just communicating with humans, it's communicating with machines or still communicating with machines and like communicating with AI, which comes back to the idea of like crafting a prompt or whatever. And so tinkering with all these different models you mentioned, all these different tools, gives you like this breadth of adaptability of your
Uh,
communication. I think communication is just like such a key skill, not only between humans, so we can communicate our ideas effectively, but also so we can now communicate with our artificially intelligent overlords.
Overlords, I like how you describe them. Awesome. Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with you. Communication is definitely the key. And just like there are so many tools that people can use now.
Yeah,
Just like talking about vector databases, like there was one, and then now there are like so many that you cannot even keep account.
yeah.
And it's same with the LLMs too and everything else. So
There's
yeah.
one more tool I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention, which is LanceDB.
Uh,
Um, because they also took a different they have like their own date format too. So it's actually a pretty it's not just an index on a database, which some of them
hmm.
kind of are. Um,
Hmm.
they have their own optimized columnar format for AI applications. So it's pretty cool. It's worth checking out.
Interesting.
I don't
Cool.
they don't
Okay.
they haven't gotten as much I haven't seen as much hype around them as I think they deserve, partially because
Hmm.
I think it's really hard to make noise in the whole RAG space
Yeah.
as a startup or open source project.
Hmm. Okay, cool. We'll definitely check it out. But yeah, thank you so much, Xander, for this discussion. It was great talking to you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it too. I'll shout out one more time if you want to check out anyone who's listening, check out Bytewax. You can find us on GitHub, Bytewax. It's spelled Bytewax. Yeah, give us a star. Thanks.